Good evening. Welcome to the regular monthly meeting of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. Please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the regular monthly meeting. There are copies of our agenda on the table in the rear, along with 2 sets of the meeting's business items. At this time, I'd call upon Ms. Rutgers, the clerk, to read the routine applications.
I would like to make SC 17 non-routine, please.
Okay. That's just done. Just done. Okay.
Okay, so now we have,
One thing I meant to do under, on a personal note for members of the board, I just want us to just keep in our thoughts and prayers Mary Lou Woods, who I was advised by a member of the RTM is in Greenwich Hospital right now, and I would just like us to keep her in our thoughts and prayers.
we now have 5 routine applications. PR2, Parks and Recreation, a transfer of $17,000. PR3, Parks and Recreation, a transfer of $27,621. ED11, Board of Education, approval to use a grant of $20,000. ED12, Board of Education, an additional appropriation for the Hamilton Avenue School in the amount of $545,000. And LAW, or Law 2, Law Department, an additional appropriation of $175,000 for professional services, and I move these 5 routine applications.
Moved by Ms. Rutgers. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Walko. Any discussion? Not all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Mr. Walko for the non-routine.
Mr. Chairman, the first non-routine item, SE 17, First Selectman approval to use $5 million, resolution to accept state grant for Bruce Museum. My understanding is that a handout was just provided by Mr. Geiger. And I so move.
Moved by Mr. Walko, seconded by Mr. Simon. Discussion.
I made this non-routine. I just want to make sure that everybody had the correct resolution in hand, which is the 5-paragraph one, which I think is just, there's nothing wrong with it.
Mr. Crum?
The only change I would make in the resolution, and it might have been one that I actually recommended, I'll take credit for a word that should be taken out. I think we should take the word additional out. And it's really, from time to time, accept grants up to $5 million, because the $5 million total would include the $1.5 million. So
Where is the word additional?
it says, and subsequently from time to time to accept additional grants. Of course, I suppose a grant for 2007 and then additional grants then refers to subsequent grants, so maybe it is okay.
I would leave it.
Yeah, I'd leave it now that I read it more closely.
Wait, this version is different.
No, but I still claim authorship. of that little, those 4 words.
Further comments on the resolution? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No. Carries.
Mr. Chairman, the second non-routine application is FD1, Fire Department, additional appropriation of $290,000 for fire apparatus, and I so move.
Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, this item, the Budget Committee decided not to have as routine as This is a replacement of a vehicle that appears to have had many issues over the course of its lifetime, and that we felt it was necessary to bring this before the full board if in fact there were any questions by BET members relative to not only this appropriation, but if they had any questions for the, is it Deputy Chief? I'm going to get this right. Assistant Chief. Thank you. The Budget Committee did vote 4-0 in favor of this item.
Are there any questions on the part of members? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to add a postscript to this, the Budget Committee is interested in exploring a policy behind the number of vendors that we use for the fire department, and we look forward to having that discussion with the fire department during the course of the year, but especially in preparation for next year's budget.
Great. Thank you, Chief, for being here. You as well. Thank you. Next item.
Mr. Chairman, the next item, SE 18, First Selectman, approval to receive grant. It's a resolution to accept FEMA grants. You should have a copy of that grant in your, it's the second page of this application. The Budget Committee did not take this item up, but I will move it as an individual of the BET.
Moved by Mr. Walco. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Norton. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that this is a resolution to accept receipts from FEMA and from the Connecticut Department of Emergency Management and Security. There will be the necessity to request interim appropriations for the amounts that are not covered by the grants that are received. And that is, my understanding is that those applications will be made over the course of the year on an individual project-by-project basis. So this resolution just sets the acceptance of the monies, and then we will receive appropriation or requests for appropriations in the future. One of the things that I think the BET needs to take a look at is the management of these funds, and we need to be in contact with the comptroller. But I suspect that we'll be able to have that discussion as time moves on and as appropriations or requests for appropriations come before this group.
Great, thank you. Mr. Warzo, did you have any comments you wanted to make with respect to this?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the BET. Before you, you have the resolution, which is the first step of the town receiving public assistance funds from the governor's declaration, request for declaration from the president over the April nor'easter. It's important to note that this is just the public assistance monies that this declaration is involved with. The federal government turned down the individual assistance request, which the governor has appealed, and we have still not heard from the Small Business Administration on the next piece of the grant and loan process. So as those things move along, we'll keep you folks posted on that. FEMA has been in town, has identified projects along with Public Works, Parks, Recreation, building construction, maintenance, and sewers, and they will be following up from a meeting that the controller and I attended last Wednesday up in Monroe. Our initial applications are in. This is the next phase internally for us here. This will go to the call of the RTM meeting, so we will have accomplished all we need to do internally to set the wheels in motion to receive funds as they start to come in on a project-by-project basis. And I'd entertain any questions the board has at this time.
Mr. Simon?
So when we receive this money, we would then go through the normal budget process of getting the grant and appropriating them to different departments based upon your request?
It would be based upon the department's request. For an example, there's a significant paving issue that needs to be done. Riversville Road from the Sherwood Avenue overpass all the way down to Pecksville. Pecksland has to be totally repaved, and drainage work associated with that has to be done. it would be, from our point of view, that the department would go ahead, schedule the work, get the paving contractors in. Once the approval's been given from FEMA that the project has been assigned a project number and a dollar amount's been assigned to that, then they would proceed and move forward.
They being
The department involved. It would certainly make sense to have, Public Works take care of the Public Works issues and the Parks take care of the Parks issues. There's reimbursements. They're going to come back to Fire, Police, GEMS, the Board of Education, but those are just simple fund replacements. There are actual work projects at the golf course, in the parks, at sewage pumping stations, road networks, drainage, sewage systems. So there's a substantial amount of work that needs to be accomplished to get the town's properties back in order after this storm event. So it's my anticipation that we'll be at this well into the fall season, and the discussion is how much should we be using municipal workforce, how much should we be contracting out, taking, the efficiencies of bringing an outside workforce to do what they do best versus what our people do best. Those are the things that the department heads need to have those discussions and move the projects forward.
And is there a separate process with the Connecticut Department of Emergency Management?
The reason that Demis is listed in there is a small projects amount, and that dollar amount is $59,700, where FEMA would come in and identify, let's just say, for argument's sake, Brookside Drive out over here where you see the road is all washed away. If that fit that criteria, where they would say, yeah, that's a small project, they would then cut a check to Demis. Demis would send a check to the town of Greenwich. That's why they're in the mix, because they're handling the small projects portion of the program.
Looking at the handout in terms of Byram, in particular, I know Denise Savageau was talking about needing resources to undertake reviews of the Byram River. Would these funds be available to do any preliminary work to look at mitigating some of the future effects, or is it only for repairing what's been damaged?
Well, these funds here are only for what's been damaged. However, with the announcement of the PA, this also opens the door to the hazard mitigation programs. And this is an item that Denise and I had been exploring prior to this event. But now that the door is clearly open, I know the Commissioner of Public Works is going to engage in bringing some proposals forth on hazard mitigation, and the town should be taking full advantage of the opportunity that's before us to use these funds for hazard mitigation. At least get the engineering and the site analysis done, and then we can build into our own planning process what would be available under Army Corps or other federal assets. If not there, then through our own budgetary process in the CIP.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Lorzella. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Number 3, the assessor's report. With us, Town Assessor Ted Gortney.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. You have a copy of my report. Just highlights are, we are now turning over to the tax collector our computer files for the tax billing process. We will be opening proposals that were made for requests for proposals on the revaluation to be done over the next 2 years. And that basically is in accordance with the plan that was given to the BET last October, and we'll be reviewing that with the Oversight Committee of the BET next week. We're also working on developing an action plan for improving communication and relationship dynamics in my office. So those are the highlights. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Questions? Ms. Tarkington?
First, I'd like to comment, Ted, that I noticed that you followed up with the charts to make it consistent with the latest revow with the previous revow, so that was a good follow-up. And I think Nancy and I look forward to meeting with you to discuss this upcoming revow. I think that's important to keep the process in place. One question, is there flexibility if, in terms of this RFP, in terms of modifying things if appropriate?
Well, a request for proposal basically is making a proposal, and of course it can be modified.
Thank you.
Further questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Wharton. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Simon.
So are you going to send out now another timetable for the revaluation, or is the last timetable you sent out still accurate?
We're going to send out a new one once we have everything finalized. It will be very similar to the last one, but will be updated and contain more information.
All right. And I hate to ask Mr. Walco's question for Mr. Walco, but where are we on your dissatisfaction with Munis, reaching the line in the sand?
We had a good meeting with Munis, actually, and they are working to try to satisfy our concerns. We're still in the position where if they can get things corrected to our satisfaction, there's really not the necessity to find another vendor. We do have another vendor that's interested and that's made a proposal to us, but at this point we're not prepared to make any recommendation.
No other questions? If not, is there a motion to accept the report?
I so move.
Moved by Ms. Tarkington, second by Ms. Barton. All in favor?
Aye.
Committee and liaison reports begin with Mr. Stone. You have audit and retirement.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following an extensive search process, the committee voted unanimously on May 10th to recommend the firm of Blum Shapiro to you for engagement as independent auditor for the statements covering fiscal years ended June 30th, 2007, 2008. That will be the subject of a resolution under new business this evening. Secondly, we approved the addition to the internal audit plan of a study into the processes followed by various town departments following receipt of checks returned for insufficient funds. Third, we reviewed procedures in follow-up to litigation involving the town. As a result of questions raised during a presentation made by the town attorney during February's budget hearings, the first selectman asked for this opportunity to describe a new procedure put in place to follow up on practices which might call for corrections. Following the conclusion and/or settlement of a case resulting in financial penalties to the town in the area of a minimum of $100,000, the designated attorney will draft a memorandum outlining a number of points, including any operational causes. The department supervisor will draft a response indicating what, if any, corrective action is to be taken. The first selectman and the town attorney, who was in attendance, agreed to modify the procedure by including the town's risk manager on the distribution list of the memos in question for eventual follow-up at an appropriate time. Fourth, concerning review of the process followed by the town in awarding contracts, the town attorney indicated that day that he was comfortable with the types of additional information that the committee is recommending be provided by prospective contractors. He outlined a process involving his department that he suggested be followed when the purchasing department feels that the information received might cause elimination from consideration of an otherwise winning bid. We believe that the purchasing director is currently incorporating the request for such additional information in the required documentation and is familiar with the recommended procedure as outlined by the town attorney. Finally, the committee decided to review the processes followed subsequent to budgetary approval in connection with the direction and oversight of construction projects. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the audit committee report. I have a brief report on the retirement board. Should I take that?
Yes,
up?
please.
Okay, thank you. At its April meeting, the retirement board reviewed the process followed by its consultant, New England Pension Consultants, concerning triggers for placing investment managers on a special review or watch list. It generally discussed but took no action on adoption of guidelines of the type focused on by this board with regard to the Retirement Board's next budget. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mrs. Tarkington, do you have a HR committee? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The May 16 Human Resources Committee meeting was attended by all members, First Selectman Lash, Ms. Cass, and Mr. Menarski. Mr. Lash provided an update on budgeted organizational changes and timing, recruitment status of the town administrator and the deputy superintendent DPW positions, and the fire chief transition. Ms. Cass provided information on current Board of Education positions and headcount, which the HR committee had requested. And finally, the monthly vacancy and reclassification reports, as well as data prepared by the Public Works Department to provide detail on part-time employees paid in the mid-March payroll, was evaluated. I also have a brief report on the MC pay plan. Would you like that, Nanda?
Sure.
As previously reported, the MC Pay Plan Committee selected Hay Group for the Management and Confidential Employees Pay Plan Update, the Position Benchmarking and Compensation Study. Ms. Cass delivered position descriptions and other information to the department heads and is notifying the chairman of each appointing authority to request timely review of the department head's data package. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Walko, did you have a report?
I do. The first one will be on the OPEB ad hoc committee. I hope you all received, or at least heard the conversation that took place relative to the OPEB and establishment of a trust fund that was originally on an agenda and that was taken off. The OPEB ad hoc committee will need to meet before the RTM meeting, June 11th, and presumably even the week before June 4th for the committee hearings or committee meetings. It also will entail a BET meeting that will need to be scheduled, a special meeting, presumably sometime next week. And that is to act upon what one can assume that the OPEB ad hoc committee will propose, and that is the establishment of an OPEB trust fund. We are on the RTM call. We just need to take formal action by the BET. So I don't know if we want to do that after the meeting or through emails, Mr. Chairman, to solicit the best dates, or if I should just send out an email soliciting dates for next week.
If you can send out an email soliciting dates for next week, it is a holiday week, so we're limited by a day.
Really Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
We could also meet on the 4th.
We could, but that's, I believe, Legislative and Rules meets on the 4th as well, and so we'd want this to be before then.
Right, but we could meet like at 6:30 or 7.
We could. That is an option. Or the following Monday, that's correct.
If you can just solicit or have the Finance Department solicit availability of members, and then once there's a concurrence, more than a majority, go ahead and...
At this special meeting, we would also like to take up the issue of the North Mianus east section of, I believe it's the east section, and the resolution pertaining to the certified costs of the west section, sorry, of the sewer project. It appears that that we need the law department to draft a resolution for that has yet to be before the budget committee or any committee of the RTM. Maybe the law committee touched upon it briefly. But I think the more prudent manner in which to proceed would be to act on a resolution and then submit that to the RTM. Now, there's no placeholder for that. The reason why we would want to have that at the special committee meeting is because we'd like to get on the June RTM, although that deadline has passed. So we need to see if we can ask for an exception to that, get on the June RTM, and then take this up at the special meeting next week.
Okay. I just have a brief report on the Glenville School Building Committee. At the last meeting, the focus was on evaluating the use of alternative energy sources. Funds were allocated to look at solar as a potential alternative use. Prior to solar, geothermal was looked at, and there will be hopefully a resolution in the next several meetings. Are there any other committee or liaison reports? If not, we'll go to the controller's report.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, BET members. You have a copy of the report. I have one slight amendment at the very last page. Monthly, I've been making a report about the lack of transfers between major object codes, and I stated in here that there hadn't been any through May. 2 of them came in very late in the week last week, Friday afternoon. So under new business, later this evening, there will be 2 transfers greater than $10,000. As far as the rest of the report, I'll answer any questions.
Mrs. Tarkington?
Yes. Mr. Minarski, again, I'm not sure of this. The second paragraph, is this consistent with what we're talking about now with the North Mianus Sewer Improvement District, and perhaps that paragraph should be modified as we proceed?
Is the question directed towards Steve?
The total cost of the above, that paragraph, is perhaps not quite what has been discussed earlier?
The first paragraph?
The second
No,
one?
the second paragraph, the total
reference-
cost of the above, oh, I'm sorry. Where is it?
You're right, the second one that relates to the
Right.
600,000
$600,000
shortfall we made up from the
right.
sewer improvement fund retained earnings. That was discussed at the budget committee,
Yes.
and there was going to be follow-up in terms of the resolutions that were approved and so forth.
I think Steve's statements is what we need to do to move forward on this is, I'm certifying 100% of the cost after the $600,000 reduction. The 4 items were based on an audit. The third and fourth item was based on an audit, and the first and second was based on negotiations between the town administrator and the North Mianus Association over the past 3 years, I should say. So, based on the resolution, and not knowing what the substance of the resolution would be, I will be certifying 100% of the cost after that breakdown of $600,000. And there will be a 100% assessment of the...
But there are really 2 parts to this. First of all, and let's not confuse the 2, there's the mechanism by which this board approves it, and separate and aside from the conversation we had at the Budget Committee, I think what we're saying now is we'd like to see a resolution from the Law Department through your office that specifically amends the resolution that we adopted several years ago.
Okay.
But then we have to determine the mechanism by which we pay this shortfall, whatever the amount is. And at least at the Budget Committee, we discussed that it would come from the general fund, from all of the taxpayers, and not just from the sewer improvement fund, and that we would make a contribution from the increase the amount that we currently pay to the sewer improvement fund by the amount of the shortfall over the 20-year period.
No. My understanding was the $600,000 would come out of retained earnings, which is the equivalent of fund balance in the sewer improvement fund.
But we just had this conversation last week about how it needs to come from the taxpayers and not just from the sewered areas,
Okay.
right? Isn't that was the sum and substance of our conversation last week?
Right, and the sewer improvement fund would be half in the sewer district and half general?
Well, we're taking
So it's not
general,
quite what we
right,
want.
we're taking general fund money over 20 years to pay down this shortfall.
We'll have to think about, this is our objective, is to pay it from all taxpayers and not plan that is either in the sewer maintenance or the sewer improvement. So we'll have to find a
Okay.
mechanism to do this.
But there are two issues. There's the mechanism by which we do it, and then there's what I will call the official act and the transparency of agreeing to this amount.
Okay. And then the resolution will identify the two different
Well,
methods.
the resolution has to at least identify what act we're taking. I'm not sure it'll identify the mechanism, but we should get that cleared up before our meeting.
Now, going back to, does that answer your question, Leslie?
No, the point was that this shortfall is to be addressed by all the taxpayers of Greenwich, not just
Okay.
those in the sewer funds. That was what was discussed, so that's the point.
Great. Are there any other questions on that? Mr. Finger? Mr. Simon? On this subject?
Who's drafting this resolution? I mean, I listened to this conversation, and I listened to what you say, and our chances of getting this done in a week are slim, unless someone's focused on doing this.
I can get back to you. It'd either be Robson and Cole or Wayne Fox's office.
And then maybe we should appoint someone like Mr. Walko on our board to be the liaison for this process to make sure we're satisfied with the process.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Mason?
Mr. Menarski, I think the issue here is that the resolution that was passed by the RTM said that the beneficiaries of the sewer district would pay 100% of the cost,
Certified cost.
That's the key
certified
word.
cost. And that percentage is no longer going to be 100, it's going to be modified by 600,000 in our case. And I think we need to have, whatever we're going to approve is going to then go to the RTM as an amendment to a resolution that they made for their acceptance of it. That's how I would understand this process to go.
See, we don't know that for sure, and that was what was at issue when we were at the Budget Committee, and I thought we were going to find that out by today. And
The original resolution called for 100% of the certified cost.
certified.
So if the certified costs are $600,000 less, that would be the amount that the homeowners get billed.
Well, we need to, I mean, we can speculate on all we want, but until we have the de facto opinion from legal, I think we're just spinning our wheels. Mr. Norton, did you have any comment on this?
No, I think it's just been resolved. I thought what I heard the controller state is that the amount that he will certify will be less than $600,000. That's the amount that the beneficiaries, of the sewer beneficiaries will pay. And the $600,000 will be absorbed by the town because it's the beneficiaries of that are the whole town.
Correct. Thank you. That's right. Mr. Finger?
Peter, in your section financing schedule, you make reference to the resolution of the Tuckman land acquisition issue that was holding up the financing. Was that resolved without any additional costs to the town?
I believe the only additional cost was $6,000 for the financial advisor because he basically did twice the work as far as bringing it to market. And I didn't see anything. The original Fitch and Moody ratings were the same, no additional cost, and maybe the bond counsel a couple hours. But the financial advisor who brought the sale to market incurred $6,000 additional cost.
Thank you.
Mr. Simon?
Have we closed on this property yet with the Tuckman sisters?
No.
Do we have a timetable to close?
A week ago, I asked Wayne about what we would do with the proceeds, and he said we would close in 4 to 6 weeks from a week ago.
And then a follow-up with Mr. Finger's question, did we have to spend any money to remediate the property?
That's a legal question. I imagine we did, yes.
That's a financial question.
The additional legal expenses is the question?
Did we have to spend town money to physically remediate the property?
Can I defer to the law committee?
Yes, Ms. Barton.
Yeah, we discussed this at the law committee, and Mr. Fox and I think Ed Gomo was at the meeting at this time, said that the resolution was that the current owners will do the remediation without expense to the town.
Great, thank you.
No change in agreement.
No change. Yep.
So what-
Mr. Norton?
Can I have a clarification? The financial advisor fee has been netted from the proceeds from the bond, from the bond proceeds, is that correct?
Say that again, the financial advisor fees netted from the,
Proceeds, the gross proceeds that we have
it
received.
comes out of the bond proceeds.
Right.
It's in addition to the amount that we'll pay the Tuckman estate.
Any other questions? Is there a motion to accept the report? Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Treasurer's report, reflecting activity for the period of April 1st through April 30th.
I have one question. Can I ask my question?
Yes, proceed.
For the retirement, under the stiff accounts, I thought we were trying to close this account out, and now I see $93,000, $93,241 has gotten transferred into this account. The last I heard, this was just checks that hadn't cleared, and now more money shows up.
I believe this is the weekly, the biweekly deductions, not the biweekly deductions, the pass-through, the contributions that go through this account into the regular pension accounts. And this would, I think,
Except it's never shown up before.
this was a much larger number, and we reduced it down. I think it's just a timing difference, and I could follow up on that for the retirement board meeting when you and Mr. Stone are at the meeting.
Okay. I'll just make one other comment, that I look at the risk fund, which I think is the true number of our appreciation, and we're doing very well on our short-term money. 5.33%.
I was going to say 5.36, but it's been, we're getting well over 5 for the last 12 months, 9 months.
Any other comments? Not, is there a motion to approve it?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Simon, seconded by Mason. All in favor?
Aye.
The minutes from the April 16th meeting. Moved by Mr. Walco. Second by Ms. Tarkington.
Lost my agenda.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? I abstain.
I abstain. I abstain also. I also abstain.
No, Pete, no, I did. I wasn't here.
I abstained 3 times in one vote.
Officers' report. I just want to begin by thanking members of the board who, in fact, did attend the various committee and district meetings prior to the RTM approval of the budget. Thank you. I want to particularly express my appreciation publicly to Nancy Barton for the work that she did with the law department and members of the RTM to revise the resolutions that pertain to the bond authorization and other ancillary issues that arose. She put a great deal of time into it over that Mother's Day weekend, I believe, and I think she deserves a round of applause for it.
Those were great resolutions.
Oh, they were nighttime reading.
Today I attended a meeting called by Bill Kelly of the Board of Ed that relates to the GEA contract. They're undertaking a reopener, and I believe Mr. Simon and Mr. Norton are going to serve as the board's representatives to that. Mr. Simon, you were the member the last go-around, if I recall.
That's correct.
So, and I believe that's it. Mr. Stone, do you have anything?
No, thank you.
Ms. Rutgers, do you have anything? Okay, new business. Under new business, we have the establishment of the mill rates for the 07-08 fiscal year, as well as approval of revised resolutions that the RTM acted upon. which in effect require our approval as well. Is there a motion to approve these amendments to the resolutions?
So moved.
That's this one page we're voting on
No, that's, well, right.
with the backup.
With the back.
There are the bond authorization resolutions, and then there were minor adjustments to the standing resolutions.
I think we should take them up separately.
Right, so we'll do the standing ones first, the ones that say amendment proposed by Legislative and Rules Committee to an ARTM call.
So I
It's been
move
moved by
those.
Mr. Walko. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Simon. All in favor?
Aye.
Now the Barton resolutions.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Walko, seconded by Mrs. Barton. All in favor?
We're just... Aye. This is just this document, right?
Correct.
You know, you guys are faster than I am.
Now we'll proceed to the establishment of the mill rates for the general fund for fiscal year 2007-8. Resolved that a tax rate of 7.763 mils on the dollar be in the same way hereby levied. Is there a motion to,
On behalf of the Budget Committee, Mr. Chairman, unanimous vote, 4-0, I so move.
is there a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Simon. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? For the sewer maintenance fund, resolved that a tax at the rate of .335 mils on the dollar be in the same hereby levied.
On behalf of the Budget Committee, I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And for the sewer improvement fund, resolved that a tax at the rate of .054 mils on the dollar be in the same as hereby levied.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Budget Committee, I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The next item of business is the appointment of Blum and Shapiro as independent accounts to conduct the annual audits of the town of Greenwich for fiscal years ending June 30th, '07 and June 30th, '08. Call upon Mr. Stone to move that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the Audit Committee, I move, resolved, the Board of Estimate and Taxation hereby appoints the firm Blum and Shapiro as the independent public accountants to conduct the annual audits of the town of Greenwich for the fiscal years ending June 30th, 2007 and June 30th, 2008, with the option of 3 additional one-year term extensions given approval of both parties. And I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Stone, seconded by Mr. Simon. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And now we move to the approval of Board of Education budget transfers. I believe we received a spreadsheet this evening,
The one that's decoded?
decoded, unclassified.
Now, the first one had the transfers, so you couldn't read them.
Is there a motion to approve those?
There are 2, right?
Yes.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Simon,
I'll second them.
seconded by Mr. Walko. All in favor?
Well, can we have a discussion?
Oh, discussion, sorry. Dr. Wallerstein is here, Mrs. Giambo is here as Chair of the Board of Education. Welcome. Mr. Walko.
Could you explain some of these?
Good evening.
Good evening, welcome.
Thank you. I guess just by way of clarification, too, on the timing, because many of you have been involved in this particular issue. The Board of Education meets this Thursday. Their packet is prepared by Friday, and our standard operating procedure is to send Town Finance. That was the agreement, right, that we send Town Finance at the same time we send the material. So that's why the timing worked out the way it did. Fortuitous that you were having a meeting this week. So the first item is data and word processing hardware. I think you're pretty familiar. We've talked about this. It's got an additional twist that we followed suit with the town and most other town departments moving from purchasing to leasing. So that's the switch from the major object code 3071, which is hardware, to 2355, 2350, which is the leasing line. So that makes it cross a major object code. That in and of itself, is the main feature of it. But as you can see in the explanation, when the district entered into the 06-07 lease agreement, we did so with an opportunity to get a credit for returned equipment. And so they anticipated that the amount for the lease would be $25,000 less. They took the credit in doing the budget preparation for the lease, assuming the credit for the returned items. However, when the returned items credit came, it came pretty late in the year. They have to pick up all the equipment and count it up and figure that out. It was determined that that credit should really be taken in the remaining 2 years. It'll come off over the 07-08 and 08-09. It's a 3-year lease. So they needed to come up with the funding to be able to pay the difference, the amount of money that they're not going to get through the credit. And so the IT/MIS department was able to put the brakes on probably some switch or server replacements in order to cover the full cost of the lease this year, or not assume the credit. So that's what that one is. I don't know if I want to pause there and answer any questions. Purchase to lease, plus the credit goes to the next 2 years.
Who determines whether or not this is a good system going forward, leasing as opposed to buying?
Leasing, we've worked collaboratively with the town IT/MIS, and we're working off of a master lease agreement that the town purchasing and Mr. Hurtorin negotiated. So other than kind of little twists, like where we have the opportunity to get a credit for returned hardware, we haven't had interdepartmental discussions about that, but I think we've all agreed it's made once we had as we do our installed base, it keeps our refresh appropriate and reasonable. I mean, I guess if I were to make a suggestion, which, maybe is something that could be looked at in the future, is looking at the financing of the lease right now. The town's master agreement is with HP Financial, so maybe the cost of the borrowing could be revisited, but I think the model is sound. But again, we're piggybacking on a master lease agreement.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Stone?
So you were going to get involved in this, let's call it replacement of equipment regardless, and this is strictly a financing vehicle.
Sure, yes.
And it was your conclusion then that the lease financing was more advantageous than the town's basically using its own funds or borrowing funds?
The town IT/MIS department also leases.
I appreciate that, but
We've actually got a hybrid. We don't lease everything. We still purchase and refresh. If it's if it's more than a 3-year cycle, we think it's probably more cost effective to run it out and to relocate or to switch our computers around to different locations. There are some computers that don't need to be refreshed every 3 or 4 years.
No,
both when you cost out recycling of hardware which you purchase, which is becoming more and more challenging, the labor associated with that, yes, we generally feel that we're making good decisions about when we lease and when we purchase.
But you could replace the equipment whether you owned the equipment and are trading it in or are simply doing it under a lease provision, isn't that right?
Correct.
So that's not part of it. So we're just talking about the cost to the town.
Correct.
And there I get back to the question of the imputed cost, the imputed interest rate on the lease. And I I'm wondering if anybody's looked at that.
And as I said, we're piggybacking on the town, we're not leasing, we're looking at a tech refresh model, and I think it is looking at the interest rate on the lease is a good thing to look at. We don't negotiate that or set that. What we do is we look at the number of units that we want to roll over any given year. We have a multi-year based on our installed base, and we're also looking at our indirect and ancillary costs, including the labor for setting up the computers, the recycling, the boxing, the carting them away, and we feel at the present time that it is a good decision, but the interest rate would be a good thing to look at.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? If not, all in favor?
Follow up this one, or are we going to get explanations
Oh,
for it?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Want the second one? The second one, again, I think is something you're somewhat familiar with. 0607 was the first year that we created a settlement of claims and judgments line item in our budget to more consistently and comprehensively track, this is in the area of special education and pupil personnel services. That's the PPS. Before, some of the settlements or litigation related to special education would track in other lines, and you really couldn't see, how are we doing in that area. So in this particular case, the 0607 budget, based on the settlements to date, needed an additional $22,500. And again, the Department of Special Education, knowing this was coming down the pike, put the brakes on in growth and development, which is teacher training. And based on the conversations and guidance provided by Mr. Calcavecchio, we're able to cover the costs through professional learning activities to be able to cover attorney's fees, which frankly, if we'd paid the attorney's fees, it wouldn't have been a transfer between major object codes. It would have been in a 140
Could be 2%.
something line. So, but we were really committed to trying to track settlements, so that's what caused it to go from 100s to 700s.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
All the other transfers are, I see on my list 7 transfers.
There are a number of transfers, but they either, the amounts that are, it feels like almost, you have to go through, as Mr. Calcavecchio does, and analyze them. They either, they don't meet the 10,000 threshold going
Or they're
between
in
major
between,
object codes. Or
not
they're,
between major
exactly.
object codes.
So what
Okay.
we've done is just highlighted the ones that are major object code.
Understood.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Wallerstein.
Didn't we originally delegate this to the Budget Committee?
Yes.
The process here, just to
timing.
explain it to everybody, was a timing. This did not make our Budget Committee meeting. It came in after that, so it came in end of last week. If, you're right, the Budget Committee would normally take a look at this. The Budget Committee would have had to have a special meeting. We were meeting anyway, and therefore added it to our agenda here tonight. It's clear.
So, all are in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
There's one other item under new business which we need a vote to take up, and that is the selectmen have proceeded to name a building committee for the Nathaniel Witherell. We are allotted a member to that committee. I spoke to Ms. Rutgers to find out if there was anyone from her caucus who was interested. From the Republican caucus, Mrs. Tarkington has expressed an interest to continue her passion for Witherell and sit on the building committee. So, at this time, we need a motion to take up appointing a representative to the building committee.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Walko, seconded by Mr. Norton. Okay. Mrs. Tarkington, you've been involved with the Witherell project now for some...
We need to vote on that.
Oh,
To take
I'm
it out.
sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. You've been involved for several years with this project. You have a desire to continue with it, and at this time, we need a motion to appoint you. So, is there a motion to appoint Leslie Tarkington as the BET representative to the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee? Moved by Mr. Simon. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Barton. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Congratulations, Mrs. Tarkington. Is there any other business to come before the meeting? If not, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you.